pursuit of freedom. Boldly telling the truth in a time of universal deceit.
Can I tell you something? I got to tell you one thing. If you expect the freedom that you say is yours, prove that you deserve it. Help us to preserve it. For being free will just be words and nothing more.
The Pursuit of Freedom with your host, Phil Pepin.
Welcome to the Pursuit of Freedom. I've had guests on this show who have talked about the diminishing role that Christianity plays in shaping public opinion. The conclusions were that very little influence now and even less in the future is to be expected. That's why I think it's important to talk about this issue and bring attention to an organization that is targeting churches to be more proactive in promoting freedom. Later, I'll be talking to Jim Harrison, National Director of Minutemen United. There was a time when churches were far more involved in shaping opinion. Over time, church leaders retreated from that effort and, in effect, marginalized the church as an important voice in society. Going to take a short break, then a commercial-free interview with Jim Harrison.
EBSEED.com.
The Pursuit of Freedom, sounding the warning against tyranny, whether it comes from the land, sea, or air.
The Pursuit of Freedom with your host, Phil Pepin.
My guest, Jim Harrison, is the National Director of Minutemen United. This organization focuses on encouraging churches to take stands on important issues. Their site is munited.org. Welcome to the Pursuit of Freedom, Jim.
Thank you very much, Phil, for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Now, I'm new to your organization, so could you explain what it's all about?
Well, basically what we're trying to do is to get the church involved in the culture war. I don't know whether you've noticed or not, but things aren't really going well in this nation.
No kidding.
Yeah, that's a fact. That's a fact. There's a lot of
trust me, if you've heard any of my shows, you know that I have brought problems up as an issue. But go ahead.
Yeah, I believe you. But basically, what we're trying to do is, like I said, get. There's a saying that as goes the church, so goes the nation, which is true. It is really true. That's what started this nation. Christians started this nation. And we have lost, and we're losing our nation because we're losing our Christianity. We've taken God out of everything. Public schools is a great example. 10 Commandments, down. Bible, out. Any kind of teaching, any kind of mention of Christ, any kind of prayer, no way. And nature abhors a vacuum. And Phil, when you take something out, something else is going to come in. And right now, and I'm using the example of government-run schools, secular humanism, by the way, the Supreme Court did say that is a religion. Secular humanism has taken over the public schools. And I've been involved, I've been watching public schools for over 25 years. I sat in public school meetings for 10 years. Now, if you've ever been to a school board meeting, you'd have to say Jim Harrison is absolutely crazy because they can be the most boring thing that you can ever imagine.
Oh, believe me, I can imagine. My wife is a school teacher.
Okay. I'll try to be gentle with you.
No, that's okay. We're pretty critical of the public school system.
Yeah. But anyway, and I for 10 years, and I helped support school board members, try to get them elected, and I even ran myself, and I've been in politics for about the same amount of time, 25 years, and supported Senate candidates at the state and the federal level, and it all boils down to there's a foundation. Still with me? Okay, I heard a rattling in the background. There's a foundation that we need to recognize, and that's the Christian foundation, or the Bible, if you will. And once we've gotten away from that, everything the house starts to fall over the hill, and that's where we are. And Phil, I believe that we're no longer at the turning point, that we're actually at the tipping point. And if you sense some desperation in my voice, it's because of that. I don't think we have years. I think in terms of months is what we're looking at, and the church has got to stand up. And in order to do that, I mentioned as goes the church, so goes the nation. As goes the pastor, so goes the church. And one of the things that we try to do is light a fire under the pastor's derriere. Because if we can't get them motivated, and they're a huge part of it. I'm not just talking about the cement and mortar. I mean, those pastors are very, very important. But the church includes all of us. It includes you. It includes I. And we have to stop. Look, prayer is important. And I think prayer is absolutely, it's great air support. But I don't think God rewards prayer unless you're willing to do something. Because it's about us learning.
Let me jump right in there, Jim, because I really am very much in agreement with you on that point. I have noticed, and I don't want to get into a big theological discussion. I have my theories on why fatalism has become a big part of the American church. Well, when I say the American church, I'm just talking about in a very general sense.
Yes, church
yeah, Christian people. And so what I have noticed is there is this, and actually it is more like Islamic philosophy. It's God's will. Well, God's will is that we work in this planet, that we are a part of it, that we are a part of the world, and that we fight evil. Everywhere I read in the Bible, it talks about action. Yet people are sitting around fatalistic. Oh, it's God's will. I can sit on my, like you say, derriere and not do anything about it. And I think that is one of the most damaging things that has happened to the church. And I've had Chuck Baldwin. Are you familiar with...
oh, yeah. Chuck.
Yeah, Chuck's been a guest on here several times, and I'm a big supporter of his efforts. And we've had this discussion about how the church has basically been marginalized in American society, and not only marginalized, but supporting things that they're not thinking through. And that's another thing that I think Christians need to remember is God gave you a brain and and the ability to think. You should use it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, and I don't know whether you've asked yourself this question. I'm going to assume that every Christian does, but maybe they don't. But there has to be a reason that we're here on planet Earth. Why did God put us here? If it was just to read the Bible and to pray, of what purpose planet Earth? I have found more, especially since I've stepped out. I found out more about myself and my God and myself relationship than I ever could have reading a book. It's kind of like the college professor. When I went to school, I was in business. The college professor in economics and in business would tell you these things. But when you go out into the real world and you start applying them, you're scratching your head going, wait a minute. I didn't know about this, and this doesn't work exactly the way it's supposed to. Matter of fact, it doesn't work at all. And so, we have to go out. We have to exercise. I think, faith without works is dead. And I think prayer is along that same lines. Prayer without works is also dead. I think God expects us to do something, to participate. Now, you don't necessarily have to go out and put your feet into it. But it may be something that God, when you're talking to somebody on the street, that you say something to somebody. It could be as simple as that. Now, we're a little more active than that in most cases, but that's okay. And by the way, Chuck Baldwin was the Minutemen of the Month. I can't remember what it was, several months ago. And we do have a website, and I'm going to plug it. It's
go right ahead.
It's www.mmunited.org. Again, www.mmmarymaryunited.org. And I would encourage the folks that are listening to this, if they like what they hear or if they're curious, to get on our website, or better yet, friend us on Facebook. It's Minutemen United again, and we're looking for like-minded Christians that see the storm clouds, that are as frustrated as we are, and want to do something about it. And to give you an example of some of the things that we do, and I sent you a link for this. During the November election, we had a sign called VoteBiblically.com. Vote biblically. Just said vote biblically. And I'm in the Columbus, Ohio area, and I went around to several pastors, and I tried to get these pastors to put those signs in their yard, and several other Minutemen did the same. And we ran against a lot of resistance, and I don't understand it. I really don't.
My thoughts are that maybe, and it's just a theory, because I have actually dealt with a number of similar types of issues like this, with why pastors are not using the pulpit like they did in the 1830s. If you went back in time, to Tocqueville came from France, and when he toured, he was amazed at, and one of the things he was amazed at is how little government we had, and how, and in fact, it was non-existent. The federal government, it was a very different period. The federal government, the only contact that people had with the federal government was the post office. Otherwise, it was local government is all they really dealt with for the most part. So people were extremely free back in those days, and he was amazed by it. But the other thing he was amazed by was the open free speech that were coming out of the pulpits of the churches. There was no 501c3 back then blocking preachers from saying, hey, if the government was doing something that they felt was wrong, they said something about it back in those days. And that's gone.
Well, I think 501c3 is an excuse, not a reason.
Okay.
And it's been I don't think anybody has ever been taken to court. Maybe you know better that because
actually there have, but it's been very rare. Yes, but for the most part, it's more of a hollow threat.
Right, exactly. And one of the pastors that I spoke with, and maybe this will shed some light on it. I went to this church because outside their front yard they had these signs, and this is before the election. These signs out: meet Santa Claus and get your picture taken with Santa Claus. And they had signs all over the yard, and I'm going, okay, this church likes signs. So I went in, and I asked to speak to the pastor, and the pastor was kind enough to speak to him. And I said, Pastor, I have this sign. I'd like for you to put it in my yard, in your front yard, your church front yard. He started to say, and he almost said it, we don't put but then he suddenly realized he had signs all over his yard. And he says, well, it's too political. And I said to the pastor, now, Pastor, I'm sure that you tell your congregation that it's their Christian duty to vote. Do you not? He said, oh, I certainly do. I certainly do. And again, it's their Christian duty to do so. He says, absolutely. So what you're telling me is if you tell them to vote biblically, that it then becomes politics? Silence. But he didn't take the sign. But there are other churches in Columbus, Ohio, some large, some small, some in between, that took the signs and they still have them up. And good for them.
That's great. Well, I'll tell you what, I've experienced both. I used to live down in South Texas along the Mexican-Texas border, and there was a church I went to, and I'll tell you what, I was pretty proud of that pastor. This was back a few years when George W. Bush was running for the first time against Ann Richards. Now, Ann Richards was a well-known pro-abortionist.
Yeah.
And he came out and said, listen, I don't want to tell you how to vote. That's not my purpose here. But I said, think about this. The fact that she is so blatantly pro-abortion, that just falls, he was from the pulpit. I was like, wow. I was amazed that he made that comment. He's just said, think about it. If your values are that you believe that abortion is a sin and against God's will, then you should vote accordingly. And that's all he said. He tried to be pretty even-handed about it. But the fact that he was willing to say that is very, very rare from what I hear.
Or you don't hear.
Or you don't hear, exactly.
Yeah, that's so sad. And you were talking about the early Parsons, and I think they recognized, which is still a fact, but we don't really recognize it, that, and I mentioned this to you, I think, in an email I sent to you, that God set up three institutions for the benefit of the man. He set up the family, he set up the church, and he set up the government. Now, as the family, who does he expect to be the head of the family? Jesus Christ. Who does he expect to be the head of the church? That's Jesus Christ. And guess whose shoulder the government rests on? Jesus Christ. We've forgotten that, and look, we're going to have to make a decision, and it's very, very soon. You're going to have to make a decision whether it's Christ or man that you're going to serve. And I think God is separating right now. I think He's separating church from church, and horse from horse, and man from man. I think that's happening now, and that may be part of what we're doing. My goal in my heart is I want to turn this around in America, and I know that we can do that with the church. I know that if the church gets together, and it doesn't have to be 100%, if the church gets together, we can turn this around. But there, on the other hand, if we don't, then America really, truly does not have a prayer. It's game, set, and match. It's over with. There's only one thing. I don't care who you elect. You can elect John the Baptist or King David to office in the United States, but the people won't support him. We mentioned public schools before. They teach children throughout the nation that life has no meaning. They teach evolution as fact. Morals are relative, multiculturalism, diversity. Man is the measure of things. Remember, they've kicked God out. Man is the measure of all things. And here's the big one. The state's your daddy. 2 million kids a year come out of that environment, and they've been doing that for 25 years. Do the math.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I have done some investigation into this, and I recommend listeners, and if you haven't looked into her work, Charlotte Isobey used to be a member of the Department of Education under Ronald Reagan. And she only served one term, and then and left in the next one because she was out of disgust. What she discovered is that the Department of Education, which I really am disappointed that Reagan did not keep his campaign promise of getting rid of, has been utilized as what you're exactly talking about. It is a propaganda tool for globalism. And
indoctrination. Indoctrination center.
Absolutely. And she discovered actual documents that indicated exactly what, and this is a plan. I'm telling you, this is not some wild conspiracy theory. She can prove it. She's got the documents. And they have targeted using the Department of Education to force, and the way they do it is, and this is another really heinous part of what the federal government does, is by the old money. They use the funding of schools as a battering ram to get in a lot of stuff, and a lot of these schools, unfortunately, have gotten addicted to this funding. And so they get a lot of this in place. Not everywhere, there are battles all over. In Texas, it's a mixed bag. We have some school districts that fight it. We have some that don't. But it is definitely a plan, and for overall, in a lot of states, they have gotten their way, and that is one of the reasons that what you're talking about is that the electorate, we the people, have been corrupted by this through the public school system, and we should not be surprised. We really shouldn't be surprised, because the public school system is, well, the way it is now, how it's incarnated now is actually a plank out of the Communist Manifesto. If you go read the Communist Manifesto, a public education, and that includes the schools and even up to the college level, that is to be infiltrated. And that's exactly what's happened. We have collectivists who believe in globalism and a world government have infiltrated and are indoctrinating our children in the public schools. My wife, who's a teacher, I mentioned to you, has seen it firsthand. Now, she fights it. She's has a little more flexibility. She teaches gifted and talented, so they give her a little more leeway. She's not as restricted as most teachers. But even in her case, she's had to filter out some stuff that she found very offensive. But yes, definitely, we are seeing an infiltration. Now, what are the ways that your organization tends to target these problems? Now, you've talked about pastors. Is there other ways that you are targeting the restoration?
When we first started out Minutemen, we had a couple of local issues that we handled, and there were some other issues that started to pop up, the homosexual issue. But we recognized early on that what those were are symptoms. They're symptoms of a sick society. America does not have a monetary problem. They don't have a global warming problem. They have a moral problem. And that's what needs to be addressed. That's what needs to be fixed. You fix that, and that by fixing that, you have to fix the church. You fix the church, and everything else will fall in place. But if you don't fix the church, all you're doing is treating symptoms, and that's our opinion. But I think if you walk it out, you're going to see it's pretty much factual. I mean, I started to say, if you could get King David elected to office, he wouldn't be able to function because of the populace. What the populace is expecting is, okay, King David, what are you going to do for us? And by the way, multiculturalism and diversity, I think divide is part of that diversity. Isn't that part of the word?
Yeah.
We're so divided.
You know, it's like First Samuel verse 8 has come to pass when God wanted and now you got to remember I'm a Christian libertarian, so this might sound a little radical to some people, but God was advocating a anarchical society, but that doesn't mean there wasn't rules. But what he wanted was self-governing people, and he said, "I don't want you to have an earthly king." And then they listed in 1 Samuel all the things that would happen if they demanded a king, and then God said that it's not a rejection of you, it was a rejection of me. He wanted people to be self-governed, focus on that. And what we have now, what you're talking about, I think, fits in exactly with that. Look at the percentage of people now who are on welfare. It is mind-boggling. It's unbelievable percentage of the American population are on some kind of government welfare program, and it has gotten people dependent on government in a way that I think is incredibly self-destructive to the country. Not only that, but financially. I mean, you name it. There is going to be huge repercussions from having so many people on the dole expecting other people to be paying for their, whatever form of welfare they've got. And that is definitely something that I think is contrary to God's teaching. We are supposed to take care of ourselves and our families, are we not?
Yeah, and the church, not the state, the church is supposed to take care of those poor.
Absolutely. That's where charity should come from, is voluntary in the church. And the fact that the government's doing it, it's no longer charity, it's theft. Because it's by force.
Yeah, they're breaking a commandment in order to do it. Actually, a couple commandments. The coveting and the stealing, for starters. And let me do you one better in terms of what's going on in this nation. We have politicians that knowingly, and I'm going to say that again, that knowingly lie, cheat, and steal, and probably worse. But at least we know they lie, cheat, and steal. And what do we do? What do we say? Oh, well, everybody does it. I mean, we're in an era of moral anarchy. It's just incredible. And again, what I'm going to come back to every time, Phil, is the answer is in the church. It's you and I. It's what we do. It's us drawing a line together. We can't do it individually, but together.
And I like what the concept of what you're doing, because it fits in with what I think is the answer, and that is that we need to focus on our communities, on our families, on what you have the ability to have an effect with. People get all just obsessed with what's going on in Washington, D.C. And I agree with a comment you made earlier. We're past the tipping point. I actually believe that we're going to face a period in this country, and I don't know when. It could be a few years. It could be what you've said, a few months. I don't know. It's too complicated for anybody to actually be able to predict. But I believe that the government is going to fail in a spectacular way, and mainly because of the dollar no longer being the world's currency. Yeah. And now there we go again. Another biblical principle. Look at how out of line with the Bible is the way our financial system operates. I mean, you're right. I mean, everywhere you look, the Bible principles would have guarded us against these things. We would have had a much more stable society for everybody.
Yep. Agree. Anyway, to answer in terms of where we're at, and we're strictly, again, we've tried to take care of the symptoms. That doesn't work, and we do focus on the church. And what we're trying to do is inside and outside of the church. Now, the church mortar brick is huge. I mean, we're talking millions of people. So we can't ignore them. We have to work with them. And they can't ignore us. They have to work with us. And there's where the problem is. They're trying to ignore us. They're trying to ignore the remnant. We don't see it. We don't hear it. Well, let us help you. And what we're doing is threefold approach. Number one, we go to the individual congregants, and we talk to them. We try to explain to them what's going on, get them to see the storm clouds, and then get them to talk to church leadership. Then there's others that we have that are pastors that do see the storm clouds. They see them clearly. And we try to get those pastors to talk to the other pastors and to get that going. And then the third approach we have is where I guess you could say we apply a little heat to the church. And I sent you, I think, a picture of what we were doing outside of a very large megachurch here in Columbus, Ohio, where we had tried to talk to the pastor, and the pastor just would not get involved with us at all. He wouldn't even speak with us. And he was not going to give us a pulpit to talk to the congregation. We knew that. And we don't have a huge budget. We don't have a radio program. So what we did was take, and this is a fairly large facility, we took 4-foot by 8-foot signs outside of that church for 9 months running that basically said, help us save marriage, help us save unborn babies. Because we're trying to get the church involved in the prophetic end of the ministry. This church did an incredible job in terms of taking care of pregnant ladies once they got pregnant and decided to have the babies, and good for them. But that's good, but how about let's prevent that from happening, or at least try to prevent that from happening in the first place. Take half the energies, take a quarter of the energies that you put into treating the symptom, and go to the front end and tell them how to keep that from happening. That's where we're at. That's where we want the church to be, in that prophetic end of the ministry. I'm rattling on. I'm sorry.
No, what you're saying has fit into a lot of things that I have observed and am very concerned about. And this applies politically, too. You know, what we have going on here is symptom, and not even a very good addressing the symptoms, but we're ignoring the core issues. And that's one of been my common theme on this show. It's one of the reasons I get into history. And I noticed in one of the things you sent me, you talked about the Black Regiment, which is fascinating to me. I know Chuck Baldwin has talked about that. Yeah, and how that the church is, boy, talk about a different period. Back then, the church, you had pastors that took up arms and fought for the American Revolution.
The American Revolution started in the backyard of Jonas Clark's church.
Mm-hmm.
And it was he and his congregation that were, for the most part, facing the British. It was a congregation and their pastor.
Yes. Now, that, if you think about that history, it makes sense why government would target. And those who love big government would target the churches, because that's where, and we got to remember what actually I try to even avoid using the American Revolution, though there are revolutionary aspects of it that are legitimate, but it was a secession from the British Empire. We didn't try to overthrow the British government. We simply wanted to secede from it. And what I find absolutely fascinating about that, and you compare it to what's going on today, is that we have lost the original concept of the Declaration of Independence. If you read through it, it says the ultimate thing is individual freedom. That's the general message. Individual freedom is the ultimate thing. And when you have individual freedom, that means you are living up to being in God's image, which, if God is perfectly free, so are we. And that's what we should be. When we take our freedom away, well, you're attacking us, human beings who are made in God's image. And that's why freedom is so important. And I think the church has bought into, a lot of members of the church have bought into a mindset that government is to get involved in all kinds of things. And I think one of the areas where it's been a real problem is government trying to define marriage. Where did they get that authority? That's ridiculous. You know, something that was defined 5,000 years ago or whatever you want, you know, I can't give you an exact, you go back in history. But what has already been well established in human society is suddenly now up for the debate by government. That's ridiculous.
Moral anarchy. Moral anarchy. If we're going to have laws based on feelings, not on common sense, and certainly not on biblical values. Are you kidding me? That book is just old. It's useless. Forget it. We're the new world.
Yeah, well, where things went wrong, and this is where you got, I think, and this is my theory on it, and I think it's based on pretty sound things, and I'd like your thoughts on this, is that where we started to really go wrong was when government started to issue marriage licenses. That was actually, if you know the history behind marriage licenses, it's pretty heinous. It was actually, the intent was to prevent people of different races to marry. And so there's a huge, and that was right around the time of eugenics and some really nasty. And that eugenics is really an outgrowth of evolution. If you go back, what's amazing about history, some very dangerous concepts all seem to be born about the same time or very close to the same. We had communism, evolution, and eugenics were all born in the mid-19th century. And they came in fruition and became part of the American culture in the early 20th century. That's where, in Hitler, you can go and read Hitler's own writings, where he got a lot of his anti-Jewish ideas in the supreme race and all of this stuff was from American eugenics. And Margaret Sanger, the founder of the the birth control, and I'm sorry, my brain is you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, the founder of Planned Parenthood also was a eugenicist. She was a very racist person, and she was an admirer of Adolf Hitler. So you see all kinds of common things with this humanistic values that have been deeply embedded into American culture. This, and a long time ago, we're talking 100+ years ago, this started to be deeply embedded. It completely changed. If we were alive in the 1840s or whatever, we'd more likely be Democrats. They were actually the ones that were more in line with Jefferson's tradition of limited government and low taxes and all that stuff. But they got completely infiltrated by progressive, or they called themselves progressives, they were really Marxists, in the late 1800s. And that transformed the Democratic Party into the radicals that they are today. but that was well over 100 years ago. So this stuff has been going on a long time, and that's one of the things that we've got to start understanding is the history behind this stuff. Then we can address what needs to be done, but first you got to realize where you've been before you know where you're going. That's my attitude anyway.
That's a great point. That's a great point. There's a couple of things. I don't want to blow your audience's head up, okay? Because I'm throwing out a lot of information, and I'm a sharing person, and I just want to give all this information out as quick as I can so everybody gets it at once. And I don't follow a logical stream. So if I get off course and I start, going to places
You've been making a lot of sense. Don't worry about it.
Okay. You had mentioned Hitler, and it's something that I'm going to reel you back into the Minutemen cause. Hitler did one thing that probably facilitated what he's doing more than anything else. He, number one, recognized the power of the church, and he went after the church first.
Romans 13.
And he neutralized the church. Now, there was a few stragglers, Bonhoeffer, etc., but for the most part, he neutralized the church. Once he had the church, the conscience of the people, it was carte blanche for him. He could take the ball and run with it. You also mentioned something about, and this is really key. This is really key because you're talking about liberties and freedoms. And we talked earlier on about God being taken out of the schools, God being taken out of society, God being taken out of most everything. You just can't have God there. There are no rights, there are no wrongs, there are no absolutes. The Bible doesn't mean anything. We have to have that out. Well, once you take that out, and we mentioned the vacuum is going to be created, something else is going to come in. Let me tell you what happens when you take that out. The Bible says that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there you have liberty. And it follows that where the Spirit of the Lord isn't, and what you and I and most other Christians are experiencing is our willingness to let Christ be taken out of society, and then we'll turn around clamoring about our liberties. Once we allow that to happen, we cause the problem. Now, if we make an effort to get God back in, then so be it, great. But don't be complaining about your liberties if you think you can let man run things, because we both know the nature of man, and it's not good.
That is a key right there, is the nature of man. And that is precisely why we, as Christians, should be like traditional conservatives. Because I've studied the conservative movement, how it came in fruition. And it was mainly in reaction to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was also in reaction to Woodrow Wilson. But it was what really brought it together was FDR. They saw this guy as, wow, he's out of line. This guy is like, and this was before World War II and the New Deal. And they saw him, consolidating massive amounts of power. And that is the key, I think, is that if Christians need to recognize that we have to fight for freedom, true freedom. And sometimes, we may not like what some people do with their freedom, but the fact that we create a society that is free, that allows people to make the right decisions too. And that's what we had. When we had a lot more freedom back in the 1830s, we also had a very strongly religious America, in the very positive sense of it. And so the two, being free and being and following God, are not
God's will.
Yes, that is God's will. It is not. And yes, back then there were people that did the wrong thing with their freedom. But look at the Bible. Look at David. You named a number of the main people. Boy, talk about messing up. That's what it shows that humans truly are flawed. Some of the, God said David was after his own heart, but David also committed murder. And so, but what we need is freedom, because Then what you said, the vacuum, that is a very good point. Then it gets filled with government, and government is secular. Government wants you to worship it. Man. That is exactly what it is. Well, I tell you what, I really think that that what you're doing makes a lot of sense, and I'm always for people who are trying to get the church back where it needs to be. And I think I really think the pulpit is a powerful place still. I think you mentioned mega churches. We certainly got them here, trust me, in San Antonio. And unfortunately, those mega churches put out a lot of very disturbing ideology that I'm very well, it just bothers me a great deal.
It bothers your spirit.
Yeah,
it bothers your spirit because you're seeing the man in the church. That's what you're seeing. That's when you go, oh, I'm a little uncomfortable with this. And there's a reason. The spirit is nudging you and going, excuse me, you need to check that out, brother. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I apologize. By the way, I got to mention our website again. It's www.mmunited.org. www.mmunited.org. Okay.
No problem, and Jim, you don't have to apologize for plugging your site. I have no problem you doing that on here. I wanted to find out one other thing before we wrap up here. What is your primary goal as far as using the organization you got? Now, I know you've mentioned a couple of things that need to improve. Now, you've got a website. The internet is, in my opinion, a wonderful thing because it is very much a open freedom forum, and that's one of the reasons the government is plotting to shut it down. It's one of the important ways to get a message out. Now, what are some other things? Now, you've talked about going to churches directly and all that. Now, are you looking to start local chapters? What is the process here?
The Minutemen United idea is just that. It's an idea. And it's basically men, women, and children who share the love, the hope, and truth of Jesus Christ, and this is key, regardless of the consequences. It means stepping out of your comfort zone. And that's really, in this day and age, it's easy to do that. If you're listening to this program and you're thinking about doing something and you're uncomfortable with it, and you know it's the right thing to do, you probably ought to go ahead and do that, because that uncomfortableness is coming from the liar, and you don't want to listen to him. You don't want that to be your father. You want to listen to Christ. You know the difference between right and wrong. Step out, take that chance. You will be amazed at the results. Absolutely amazed. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be a small thing. I've got people that call me on the phone daily, and they're trying to sell me something. And if I keep getting calls from the same company, here's what I've been doing with them. When they get on the phone with them, the first thing I ask them is, have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? And they go, whoa. And if they say no to me, the next thing I'm going to ask them is, do you believe you were created, or do you believe you evolved? And they're going to tell me they think they evolved. All of them are going to tell me that if they don't believe in God. And then I'm going to ask them, when you drove to work this morning, did you drive in a car? And they go, yeah. I said, do you think that car was created, or did it evolve? And they're going to say, well, it was created. I said, exactly. Now, which is more complicated, you or that car? And they're thinking, and I'm going, now, were you created or did you evolve? And by the way, if you were created, that car was created for a purpose. Were you created for a purpose? And believe me, that's enough to get them thinking. But I'm just saying that's one small thing that you can do. Maybe.
Yeah, well, that's what we're called to do. We are called to spread the word, but we're not called to beat it over people's head. But that is a beautiful way to do it. You just took an opportunity when it presented itself. You know, and I absolutely appreciate that. And that's one of the things that I have tried to talk to some Christians who think that government might be the way to do something, and I'm saying, no, that is, you know, we do need godly people. I totally agree with you. We would be much better served to have really people of strong faith in the positions of government. And I'll tell you what, I know people who are. I have allies like you. I've been very politically active. In fact, I even was a campaign manager for somebody that ran for the U.S. Senate here in Texas, and I've been involved in very directly involved in Ron Paul's campaign. In fact, I did a fundraiser for him where we raised over $50,000 for his campaign, and I'll tell you what, he challenged people at one fundraiser that I was at for him that spurred me to want to do the one we did in San Antonio. He talked about the Constitution being inspired by God.
It's undeniable. It's undeniable.
Not only that, and he was unabashedly defending being pro-life. And let me tell you something else, Jim, this really bothers me. You know, we could have gotten abortion not necessarily completely eliminated, but we could be way more along the lines of getting rid of abortion if Christians had gotten behind the Sanctity of Life Act that Ron Paul introduced. And you know what? And it was based on the Constitution. If you read the Constitution, guess who has authority over the courts? We have so perverted the original system. It's come to an end, and we've got these judges who rule from on high. I don't really believe in the Supreme Court being so doggone supreme. If you read the Constitution, Congress has a lot of power over the Supreme Court, if you actually read it.
And their power from the people.
That's right. And that was actually, Congress was supposed to be the most powerful branch, not the Supreme Court and not the presidency, because it is more closely to the people. And one of the powers that they have is they have the ability to set the jurisdiction of all courts, including the Supreme Court. What Ron Paul's law was based, or his bill was based on, I wished it became a law, was telling the Supreme Court, guess what? You have no authority to rule on abortion. It's a state's issue. Guess what would have happened? We would not have all 50 states being in support of abortion. There would be some that would, but there would also be states like Texas and other states that would probably ban it for the most part. In other words, lives would have been saved. But guess what? Nobody got behind that bill. There are ways of dealing with these issues that are right there in our face, but they're not being utilized, and this is very frustrating for me.
I hear you, and to me it's so obvious, but I just can't get enough people at this point. Well, first of all, I told you before, we're the best kept secret in America, because I believe that the church holds the key, and nothing's going to happen without them. And that's our message. And people are trying to pass laws, but they can't exist. They're not going to get anywhere because there's no foundation for them. That foundation is righteousness.
Absolutely. And and I think what I just mentioned to you, Jim, about the Sanctity of Life Act is exactly identifying all of the major so-called pro-life organizations did not get behind this bill. Why? It doesn't make any sense to me. It's far. What do they promote? They promote an amendment to the Constitution. Well, an amendment to the Constitution is extremely difficult to accomplish, but isn't passing a law that the Congress has an authority to do a lot easier than trying to amend the Constitution? None of it makes any sense to me. And so you're right. What we have is a situation where we are not taking the solutions and we're not uniting as a church, as believers behind things that can be done. And it is very frustrating to me.
I agree, obviously. I like that word, unite.
We do need to unite. I'm a big believer in that because, and it's not in a collectivist, socialist kind of way. It's uniting on a common purpose. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing to unite.
That is the thing. I have a great friend, Coach Dave Dobmeyer. I don't know whether you know him or not. If you don't, you should. He's got a ministry called Pass the Salt. Coach, by the way, was a high school football coach that got sued by the ACLU for praying with his football
I
team.
like him already. If he's been sued by them, he's a good guy.
Yeah. But I was at a Liberty meeting this weekend, and at that meeting, he gave a speech, and he talked about his football team. And he said the first thing he did with the football team, and I'm in Ohio, was right above the door, Massillon, Ohio, 168 miles. Now, Massillon, Ohio is where the high school football championship is held. He had those kids thinking about one thing and one thing only. That was getting to that championship game in Massillon. And as a church, we need to think about one thing, and that's creating an environment where that righteousness which we worship, is there. And where we have righteous, just room for righteousness. That's got to be there because nothing else works without it. If you don't have right and wrong, if you don't have a place for right and wrong, you're trying to put that square peg in a round hole. It just isn't going to work.
No, we all have to have rules of government in the sense of being self-governed, and that is where it really needs to manifest that we all have those rules in our heart. And that's where Americans used to have it, a lot of them, not everybody. You know, we're not a perfect group of people.
Doesn't take everybody.
No, it doesn't. Well, no, that's why I love Samuel Adams, who said that it does not take a majority to prevail, but an irate minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men.
Amen, amen.
Yeah, and in fact, you know, that's how I ended my speech. I was very fortunate to be a local guest speaker at the San Antonio Tea Party. In fact, that Glenn Beck and and all the rest, it was nationally televised and all that. I gave a speech in front of 16,000 people, and let me tell you, I am not used to doing that. It was an it was an interesting experience, but I fortunately prepared well enough, and it went good. And so but that, I tell you what got me feeling good, Jim, was certain elements of the speech that I hoped would resonate with the crowd did. And that really got me inspired. In fact, that ultimately led me to do other things, and ultimately led me to having this show. And so I felt like there was a purpose. There was something, doors got open, and that I've always believed that's how God works, isn't it? He opens doors.
Yes, sir.
And it sounds to me that what you're doing is really on the right track, and I really am glad that you contacted me on Facebook, that we had this opportunity to talk. And go ahead, plug your site again.
Oh yeah, I haven't done that for a while. It's our website is www.mmunited.org. That MM is short for Minutemen, so it's www.mmunited.org. And one thing before you kick me off here that came to my mind is that Jim Harrison, I don't have all the answers. And the people in Minutemen United don't necessarily have all the answers. But we need the people that are listening to you, because in the counsel of many, there's much wisdom. We need your input. We're missing opportunities because you don't know about us and you're not giving your input to us. We need that input. We welcome that input. Again, we don't have all the answers. We have a heart for righteousness. We don't know how to get there. We've got our ideas. If you think you've got better ideas, we're open to it. We need to get this resolved, and folks, We don't have that much time. And again, I'll say again, we don't have years. I believe it's down to months before it's too late.
Jim, I really appreciate you spending time sharing your passion with the Pursuit of Freedom listeners, and I think that you're a guy that's going to make an impact.
Well, through God.
Absolutely.
I'm an instrument. And I hope I'm working through him. And God bless you for taking the time, and God bless your listeners, and God bless America, brother.
The Pursuit of Freedom with your host, Phil Pepin.
Thank you for listening. If you support the efforts of this show and have a product or cause to promote, please advertise here. The rates are very reasonable, and it includes an ad on the Pursuit of Freedom Show website. That's pursuitoffreedomshow.com. The website has articles I've written and also high-resolution versions of some of the shows that we have done. I need the support of freedom-loving patriots to continue to do this show and engage in the investigative journalism covering topics that the mainstream media won't cover.